sometimes you gotta just dance a little bit to get the energy going. I read 9 books in the month of October and it was all over the map. I had a 5-star all the way down to a 2.5-star. So it was definitely a wild ride in the month of October, but I am excited to talk about these books that I read. Hi guys, it's Amy and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. I hope that you're doing well. Let me know how you're doing in the comments below. And of course, we are talking about my October reads. But before we get into that, just a couple of updates. Something first really exciting. We have reached over 600 book friends or subscribers here on this channel. I call you guys book friends in my post. Maybe we need a different name. I really haven't thought about that, but it's like us together in this little corner of the internet. So if you have any ideas for what we should call ourselves, definitely let me know in the comments. I just really appreciate you guys being here and getting to talk with you about books. And it's just really exciting to see that group grow, and I really hope that we all get to interact with each other more. And on that note of interacting, my next update is that I am planning to do a live stream. I did a couple of live streams. I think it's been a couple of years now, and I haven't really done it since. But I thought since we are growing a little bit, I would really like to be able to talk with you back and forth. I have done live streams in the past with other content, and I always enjoy getting to chat back and forth with people. So I have a poll on my community tab, or my posts. You go to the community tab and there is a poll for different times of the week that potentially would work for you. So vote and let me know whether a weekday, a weeknight, a weekend at night, whatever. I think right now the consensus so far has been a night stream on a weekend night. So that's where we're at, but definitely go and vote. I plan to do that sometime in November. So I will leave the poll up probably for another week, and then we will go from there. And I will definitely be posting updates in the community tab. And if you don't follow the community tab, definitely go and check it out, because I post some extra little nuggets in there that I don't talk about on videos. So definitely go and check that out. But those are my updates, so let's get into some book chat. As we're getting into this, definitely let me know what your favorite read of October was. And I had 9 books that I read, and again, it was all over the map, but I tried to have more spooky reads for the month of October, and it was just kind of an interesting adventure. My moods were all over the place as far as what I wanted to read. But first up, if you saw the vlog for this, you know I read the book Babel by R.F. Kuang. I gave this 4.5 stars, and I really enjoyed this book. This book was really heartbreaking, even though I enjoyed it. I thought it was fantastic, but it definitely has a lot of emotional depth and tragedy. So this is a dark academia fantasy, historical fantasy that really explores racism, colonialism, systemic oppression, especially within the education system. And it's all done in this sort of academic setting of an alternate version of our world and an alternate version of Oxford, the university. And it is about a boy named Robin who is taken, adopted, whatever you want to call it, from his country of Canton, and he is brought to the UK, to London, and he's raised basically to become a student of translation and magic at Oxford. And he really believes that he's being given this special opportunity, but as he lives longer in London with his caretakers, being within the school, he sees that everything is not as shiny and wonderful as he has been promised. And it is just so tragic seeing our main character Robin's reality just kind of break down, his sense of reality, his sense of safety. And you definitely see that not just with him, but with the other characters in the book as well. And then it kind of evolves into this story about identity and morality, resistance against corruption. And I really appreciated the way that Kwong wrote this. It was in this academic setting, and I feel like a lot of people kind of dog her about being super intellectual or whatever, making it difficult for like the average reader to read her books. I feel like she made the academic setting more accessible in relating it to just everyday language and how things translate from one language to another, and bringing in the magical element, but also just like the relationships between the different characters, being able to see it in the dialogue and everything. I feel like it really grounded it in reality. It's not just seeing someone talk about theories in a textbook, it was being acted out. I feel like that to me really made it come to life, made it come off the page. I think that helps make the sort of dark academia, academic setting, university students, like it makes all of that more accessible in my opinion. It definitely makes me want to read more of her books, especially like Calabasas, because it is in this academic setting, but the way that she makes it relevant and relatable to, I think, the average person. I really like the blend of this sort of historical setting, even though it is like a fictionalized version of our history. This taking place in, I believe, like the 1830s, but also like incorporating kind of magical elements in it as well. And I don't want to give anything away about that, but this definitely does have some magical elements to it. All I will say about the magic system is that it is tied to language, and it is very, very fascinating and very symbolic. So just definitely like pay attention to the language bits, because there's just so much like goodness that you're going to get out of it. I think the only downside of this book for me was like the last, I think like 20%, like, or the last 25% of the book kind of dragged for me a little bit. And it was definitely like a dramatic ending. There was a lot happening, and I understand kind of like drawing out like the suspense of things happening, but I feel like it could have been a little bit more concise, but that's just my opinion. So I definitely think that this is worth the read. I mean, it was almost a 5-star for me if it weren't for that last little bit of the book, but I still really enjoyed it and thought it was very well written. It was such a compelling story. Like it was just, it hits you in the feels, but it definitely makes you look at yourself and see like, you know, have I been a part of any of these issues? What can I do to help contribute to change? And I really appreciate a book that can do that, where it's equal parts like educational and entertaining and bringing awareness to different issues, but in a way that is in this like, you know, fictional story with fantasy elements. And people saying that fantasy or even just fictional stories in general don't contribute to change, don't, they're wrong. They're dead wrong, because you're being put in the shoes of different characters and learning to empathize with them. And that definitely is what happens with reading Babel. And if I haven't iterated it enough, this is a devastating book. It really is just kind of mind-boggling, the depths of corruption within this university, within the government, within just individuals in the story. It all kind of trickles down, and it was just like so emotional. I say this a lot, I'm not much of a crier. I didn't cry reading this book, but it definitely was like heartbreaking. So just be aware of that. It definitely is emotional and intense. And with that intensity, I think it's really interesting to see like within like rebelling against corruption, the gray morality that comes up with what like resistance, and you know, do two wrongs make a right. And there's definitely that sort of discussion brought up, and I really appreciated that as well. I think that it has a really great like nuanced discussion of resistance and rebellion against oppression, and I think that's really important because it's never fully just like black and white, because we all are flawed, and I think it really portrayed that aspect very well. So I definitely would recommend, if you want a dark academia fantasy that is in like a historical setting and definitely like morally complex stories. So if any of that sounds good to you, I would definitely recommend Babel. So I was all about the dark academia vibes. I wanted the dark academia, the Gothic, all of that. So I didn't want to just read about people being in school. I wanted to read the things that these students would read in school. So I thought it'd be fun to read some Gothic literature. And of course, I think a quintessential one is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And I read the original 1818 text. There are later versions that are less detailed, I think more concise. I read a little bit of a later version, and that was kind of what I was seeing, was that there were like things that were cut out. If you're wanting a little bit more meat, a little more detail, I think I would stick with the original text. There is someone I'm mutuals with on TikTok and Instagram, and we were chatting a little bit, and they were saying that they are going to be reading two different versions, like back to compare. I'm definitely excited to see what they think about it, but I think that'd be interesting to read and compare. So maybe I will read a later version at some other time. But I read the 1818 text, and for me, it was very thought-provoking. And it had, of course, great Gothic atmosphere. And it just is this really great classic. I thought the story was very powerful, even though it is very like macabre, of course. It was much deeper and emotional than I was anticipating. I think when you think of Frankenstein, most of us probably think of the movies and everything, but of course, we know that Frankenstein is not the monster, but it is Dr. Frankenstein, is what that name is referring to. And in this, it was so interesting to see the emotional journey that the monster and Dr. Frankenstein go on. I just really appreciated what Mary Shelley was doing. And in reading this and kind of looking at more videos about it and everything, just kind of learning what her process was, like how she wrote this on basically like a vacation like trip with some other author friends and her husband, and they had a competition to write like a scary story, and this was her story that she came up with. And I think that is absolutely fascinating and so much fun and so nerdy. I love that about it. But as I'm getting into this, I'm going to be getting into more detail about this story, and this may be considered spoilers, but I think the story is so well known that I'm going to think it's okay. But if you don't think it's okay, just skip to the next book. I'll, of course, have my timestamps and everything. But I think it is generally known that the true monster of the story is not the monster that is created. The monster is Dr. Frankenstein in this story. And you really get to see the creature that is created in this really like deep emotional way. He's much more intellectual than you see portrayed in like movies and in pop culture. And I just thought that was so fascinating. Of course, he has like this sort of development that he has to go through. You know, he's not mindless like I think pop culture portrays him. I said he was intelligent and eloquent and tragic, and it really was very tragic. It was a very beautiful story at the same time, but he was so much more of a relatable character because he was able to, just the way that he processes his world and tries to relate to the world outside. It really blew me away. I was really impressed. And it made me realize like this is why the story like has stood the test of time. When you look at the character of Victor Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, I said he was selfish, cowardly, and unwilling to face his actions. And I think that is very true. I absolutely hated him, and my hatred grew more and more with the book. I could not stand him. He is an awful character. But I really appreciated how this like really explored like the themes of like guilt and ambition, and even like playing God. And I said playing God in pursuit of glory. That definitely is something that I think is a general consensus when it comes to any portrayal of Frankenstein, is like somebody playing God and reaping the consequences of that, whether the monster created by Frankenstein, the creature, is portrayed as intelligent or not. So there is that like sort of through line with any like Frankenstein story. So there's at least that. Just looking at the creature and his experience, his loneliness, and it was just really heartbreaking. Like I was saying, it makes him a very sympathetic character, but it really is like horrifying, like the experience that he goes through and what it makes him out to be, because you feel sympathetic for him, but he's also like terrifying at the same time, the creature. So it really is like this extremely morally gray sort of story, which I love. I love a morally gray story. I love morally gray characters. But this definitely gets like philosophical, and I was really surprised by that. So I think that is where I think a lot of the terror is like questioning humanity, questioning yourself, questioning what is right and wrong. Why am I having to go through this? Like there's so much to unpack in it, and I think that is why it's definitely stood the test of time. Not just that it's this inventive story about someone creating a creature out of like other dead human parts, which of course that is horrifying. But I think we've become kind of numb to that because it's so popular. I think the real horror is in like the philosophical and even like psychological part of the story. As I was reading the story, and definitely by the end, I felt like it would be really interesting to kind of analyze the text and see how it is potentially a metaphor for like family trauma and neglect, dysfunctional families, because there is a lot of family drama in this story. And even with the relationship between Victor Frankenstein and the creature, I think there definitely is a lot of those elements that could be represented. So I definitely would like to explore that more. I don't know when I will do that. Just this being something that I didn't like study in school, and I know a lot of people do, I think it would be really interesting to kind of get that academic study of it and really break it down. But if that sounds like something that would interest you, in me getting really nerdy about metaphors and stuff, let me know in the comments and maybe I will make a video about that. I rated this 4 stars because this was not a flawless book to me. I really appreciated that the writing was like, it was gothic, it was dramatic, but occasionally it was like dry. Even though like it was very like atmospheric, there were moments where it was a little bit dry. And that could just be like the difference in like time period with me, being in the modern age of 2025 and this being from the 1800s. I totally understand that. I usually don't have trouble like reading especially like English from like older periods. It just depends on the book, but it wasn't that I had difficulty reading, it was more of just it felt dry to me. I do feel like immersion reading this with the audiobook, it definitely like enhances the mood and definitely helped with my comprehension. And that's just me as a reader, like that's just how I process information. I think me getting it 2 different ways helps with my attention and everything, but I do think that it enhances the reading experience because you're getting the inflections and everything, and it really brings the text to life, especially because it is from an earlier time period. So even though this wasn't a flawless book for me, I definitely think it is culturally and really emotionally impactful. I think that it is important that it's something that we continue to study because it's topics that are, I think, relevant to even today, because, we could translate it looking at it in a modern perspective. Like you could start a whole discussion about like AI and things like that. I won't get into all that. I'm not going to do that. But I think it would be really interesting to kind of see how does this relate to our modern day life. But I think this is a must read for fans of just like Gothic vibes in general. Definitely Gothic horror, philosophy, or just classic literature. This is definitely one that I wanted to check off the box as far as my list of kind of classic literature that I want to read. I definitely haven't been as vigilant about it as I planned to at the beginning of the year. And now that we're at the end of the year, I'm like, I haven't really done as much as I had hoped. But I did get some of it this month, and I'm really glad that I got to Frankenstein. Okay, so after these really like intense and dramatic books, I needed some levity. So I read Love and Other Conspiracies by Mallory Marlowe. This was such a fun book. I rated this 4 stars. It is just kind of this silly but really sweet romantic comedy, but it does like incorporate like conspiracies with like cryptids and aliens and that sort of thing. So it fit within kind of the spooky season theme. I said this was sweet and heartfelt and delightfully geeky, a fun and feel-good romance. So this is following 2 content creators, and one finds the other and decides to turn a conspiracy podcast into an online like web show. And it's about them like befriending each other, getting to know each other. It's a male and female dynamic, and about like their travels and research investigations about all these different really interesting conspiracies. And of course, there is like kind of this silliness to it, but it really does create like a unique sort of setting for a romantic comedy, but it is also grounded in reality because we're dealing with a growing friendship and relationship. There's also like family drama in this that I thought really added a lot of depth to it. But I think what I really enjoyed was like the natural just like chemistry between the characters. I felt like they had a really authentic emotional connection. It really was about them like kind of seeing each other in vulnerable moments and being like, okay, I am stepping in and I'm going to be here for you. And it was on both sides of the table. So it really felt like this equal partnership, and I really appreciated that. I think this had a really great exploration of healing from like emotional abuse and family trauma. And it wasn't like them having to be each other's therapist or anything. It was just like in the moment, kind of like standing up for yourself and setting boundaries, being okay with making your own choices and just being supportive of the other person. So it's not like super intense, but there is that element there. And it was more of just adding this depth to the characters' stories and definitely adding emotional depth to the overall story. Now, there are a couple of spicy scenes in this, but they are easy to skip. I skipped over them. That's my preference to do that. But just know that there are a couple of those in there. I feel like this was just really cute and just celebrated like nerdy love and embracing who you are. It was cozy. I feel like it was very validating for me. I just really appreciated like the kind of charm of the characters. They both were very interesting characters, and they had really great banter between the two of them. And I really appreciated their connection. And there was no like 3rd act breakup, which I feel like is in every single romance book nowadays. And it's like you just get used to it, but it not being there was so refreshing. So if you want a romance book that is fun and silly, that doesn't have a 3rd act breakup, but still has emotional depth, I definitely would recommend Love and Other Conspiracies. Now, you didn't think I was gonna get off of my spooky stuff, did you? I had to keep it spooky this month. I needed a little bit of a break because of the really emotionally intense stories, but I did get back into the spooky and some classic literature with Dracula, of course, by Bram Stoker. And I gave this 3.5 stars. It is definitely macabre, very gothic, and just has this great classic vampire feel to it. Of course, it is the vampire story that's so much of like pop culture and other vampire stories are based on. It was dark, it was chilling, and it was everything that I was hoping for, even though I didn't fully love it, but it definitely got to the sort of like dark intensity and just the classic vampire story that I would expect from Dracula. This was definitely less censored than I was anticipating. I think, you know, you think of like the old like Universal films with like Bela Lugosi. That's what I think of when I think of Dracula. I think it was definitely not romanticized like modern versions where you think of like the Dracula with Gary Oldman and Winona Ryder. I couldn't think of her name for a second. That one definitely freaked me out. I think that is more like romanticized. This definitely was like a horror story. It was not a love story in any shape or form. It definitely is like a story of like forbidden desires and obsession and power. So that definitely was more of the focus. But this definitely features like Victorian themes and morality as well. Definitely themes of like purity, temptation, faith, and classic gender roles, which of course, it being from that time period, like you're gonna expect something like that, but it definitely was like the men are here to save the day and the women are like damsels in distress, and they're like very much put on this pedestal of like being pure and innocent beings that you don't want to be corrupted. And it was just in like this really condescending kind of way where it seems like it's this very virtuous position to take in protecting the women and everything. But I think there were times when it was a little bit overboard and you're like, actually, this is kind of condescending. And this was a story that kind of dragged near the end. It was a lot of like traveling and just kind of drawing out what was happening, but it definitely has this kind of great drama to it. So I think it can be hit or miss for people. For me, it was a little bit of a miss, but I still really enjoyed like the vivid descriptions that Stoker gave and how he just built tension throughout the story. It was so well done, and definitely, you know, I can see why it has stood the test of time because it does have those elements to it. And just the moments where you get to like actually see Dracula and he's interacting with people and learning about the just dark deeds that he's doing, being at his castle, like it was all just so atmospheric and I was just eating it up. I am not like a vampire enthusiast. I'm not really a huge fan or anything, but it was more of like getting this original story and where so much of like the dark and brooding Gothic vibes come from for a lot of books and pop culture. So it was just really fun to kind of get into that atmosphere. So kind of going off of what I was saying earlier about some of the like sexism in the book, you definitely need to read this with historical context because of course, sexism, but there's also some racism in here and definitely like outdated views on mental health. So just be aware of those things. You know, you do have to keep the time period in mind. It's important to read stories like this because we need to see how we've been able to advance and to not revert back to the past. Just like we say, like, you know, it's important to know history because it prevents repeating the past. And I think this is definitely a good example of that in this sort of like fictionalized, fantastical way. I was partly like reading this physically and then listening to the audiobook. The audiobook can be a little bit confusing because it does shift point of views quite often. So it's just like paying extra attention to who is talking. It's a lot of like journal entries and letters. It's all from that kind of perspective. So just knowing like who is writing to whom, and it just was a little bit confusing. So maybe immersion reading or just reading it physically. But if you want the audiobook, definitely just like pay attention to those shifting perspectives. I honestly think that even though I rated this 3.5 stars, that this is definitely worth reading. It's a classic for a reason. But if you want just like some classic like Gothic horror vibes, if you want something that is like intense and macabre, it's very rich and like decadent, but in this like creepy, forbidden sort of way. And I really enjoy the whole atmosphere of it. And just some of the like standout moments where you really could just picture what was happening and it coming off of the page. So it definitely is really great writing, and I'm really glad that I can say I read this classic. And if you haven't read it, I definitely think that you should. As the month went on, there were some things happening just like personally in my life that I felt like I couldn't give my attention to a full book. So I just decided to get a couple of like shorter stories. And one of the stories I read was The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. And I rated this 3.5 stars. It is a creepy short story. It's very unsettling, but it's very thought-provoking. This definitely feels like the kind of like creepy short story that you would probably read in some kind of literature class, and you would analyze it, read it in class or whatever, and it would creep you out. It would stick with you for like the rest of the week. And then you have a quiz on it on Friday or something like that. It definitely felt like that, but I always really enjoyed those creepy stories. If you know what I'm talking about, let me know in the comments what your favorite one was. I really enjoyed The Most Dangerous Game. That definitely would be one to read for like a spooky, scary story, but this was the first time that I read this one. This follows a woman who is confined to this sort of small room at this kind of like vacation home by her husband, and it's for her health. But as she is staying in this room and kind of confined, her mental health just kind of like unravels, and she becomes obsessed with the yellow wallpaper that is on the walls. It is really strange, and I think you could maybe take different interpretations of it, but I think it has some really interesting commentary. But it really just has like this sense of dread and definitely like claustrophobia. Like you are getting this woman's perspective, and it's kind of like from her journal, and it's like how she just feels more and more confined and is just kind of losing it. And it definitely is intense very quickly. And it being such a short story, it's really impressive that it was able to just kind of like go full throttle. But I thought it was really interesting, kind of the commentary that was in here. I was reading a couple of like articles about this story, and it was a lot about like women's mental health and how women have been mistreated or misunderstood as far as mental health goes. There was kind of like, it was alluded to possibly the character dealing with like postpartum depression. And it was just very interesting seeing how it was like, oh, just like close her off, shut her up in a room, and don't let it be seen, don't let it be heard, as if it's like this shameful thing and not just something that is just a part of someone's health and that can be dealt with. I don't know when this was written, but clearly it is from a time that was less educated about mental health. I definitely would recommend reading this twice. That's what I did. It was like reading it for the first time just for the experience and getting the story. And the second time was me kind of being able to analyze it a little bit better. And I was able to kind of pick up more on the themes, because like the first time I'm reading it, it's like the intense like growing dread and suspense and just experiencing that, and then going back and reading it and seeing like, okay, this is really what was happening kind of under the surface. So I definitely would recommend doing that, and I definitely would recommend like looking up some articles about it if you are not familiar with it. I thought it really helped me with my understanding and made me appreciate the story more. But if you want just like a short story for like cozy evening, something to like creep you out, I thought this was really just like chilling and really insightful. It was a fun read, but there still is like some depth to it. So I thought that was really cool. So yeah, perfect for just like a spooky evening, even though I know we're like past like Halloween and everything, but sometimes you still need a good scare on a cold, maybe rainy night or something. Speaking of scary reads, We Have Always Lived at the Castle by Shirley Jackson was my next read. This was another shorter story that I read, and this is more of like a novella, but I rated this 4 stars. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was just an excellent story. It was eerie. It was very perplexing. It had me guessing the whole time. I was constantly like searching for clues, trying to figure out what's going on, because we have a very unreliable narrator in this story. And even though the narrator is like one of the main characters, I believe they're like 18 or 19 when they're giving the story, but they feel very childlike and it's very off-putting. I really enjoy that aspect about it, but this is about a family that has like a really kind of dark past, And it is two sisters and their uncle living in this kind of like manor. They call it the castle, kind of on like the outskirts of this town, this village. And they are not really liked by the townspeople. And that's because there's possibly some murder in this family's history. So that's all I'm really going to say about the plot. I don't want to give anything away, but it is one that, like I said, really kept me on my toes. It really was unexpected. And I really like Shirley Jackson's writing. This was my first time reading one of her books. I thought her writing was beautiful. It was very descriptive, but it was also very like tension filled, and it was constantly like catching me off guard, where I would read a line and then they would drop a hint and it was like, wait, what did you just say? Did you really just say that? What does that mean? I don't know what that means. And I really liked that. It was so unexpected, and it really just takes you on this journey that you're like, who did what? Who's behind what? What is really going on? And I like a story that can do that. You know, I wanted like scares, I wanted like spooky for this season, but I didn't want something that was going to like traumatize me. And this definitely is like a good story in that sort of rating or like content that I can handle. I don't know the best way to say that, but this was just like so well done and I really enjoyed it. It again was very unsettling, but I thought it was really like this show of like masterful writing of Jackson in kind of using perception and reality to like subvert our expectations. And yeah, I definitely recommend it for like a shorter read, one that's spooky, that isn't gonna like traumatize you, at least for my standards. I definitely want to read more Shirley Jackson. I've heard things about like The Lottery, and there's another book, I can't think of the name, it escapes me, but I'm definitely wanting to read more Shirley Jackson. If you saw my previous video, I made mention of this next book, but my husband and I finally finished Ship of Destiny, which is the last book of the Live Ship Trader trilogy by Robin Hobb. And we had been reading this for several months. We just kind of let like TV shows, especially like anime, this has been the year of anime for us. We kind of let those things like get in the way. And in part, it was like kind of nice to kind of draw out the experience of the story, but we definitely like it took us way too long to read it, but it was always like, oh, but we want to watch this, we want to watch that. So prioritize reading over TV, kids. I just really enjoy like getting to read the whole realm of the Elderlings, this whole universe of Robin Hobb's with my husband. Like we read Farseer trilogy, the first one, and then we read Live Ship Traders together. This was such a great trilogy, but it starts off with a huge cast of characters that are like almost all unlikable. But by the third book, Ship of Destiny, you are so compelled to root for these characters. And only Robin Hobb could do something like that. If you're not familiar with kind of the premise of this trilogy, it is the second trilogy of her whole realm of the Elderlings universe. It has different characters from the first trilogy, the Farseer trilogy. This is kind of surrounding a family of traders, like merchant traders, that have ships that are sentient, and kind of like the city that they live in, the experiences that they go through. It shifts from different characters within the family and also some other character perspectives as well. But it is this just epic kind of journey, and there's multiple live ships, different sentient ships, and their stories are so moving and compelling as well. So there's a lot going on in here, but it really just like deepens the lore and the magic of this world. And it was always just in surprising ways that only Robin Hobb can do. I am like kind of scared because I feel like nothing is ever going to live up to Robin Hobb's writing. So it's like I want to drag out reading her whole universe as long as possible, because I see people that finish it online and they're just like emotionally devastated, and they're like, no other book is ever going to compare, no other series is ever going to compare. And that is like so daunting to me. I don't I don't want to like have something that like just completely decimates every other book or series, but I still want to experience it at the same time. But like I said, the character work in here is just absolutely incredible. There are characters that were, you know, like, okay, you're okay. I don't necessarily love you, but you love them by the end. There are characters that you absolutely hate at the beginning that you really change your mind about because of the character growth that they go through. And then there are some really awful villains in this story. So we get like the full gambit of different characters, and it's just so masterfully done. I'm clearly a fan, obviously, but there's so much heartbreak, there's so much growth, and there is hope within the story. It's always kind of this thread of hope that kind of carries you along within the story, but you're like, I don't know how we're going to get out of this one. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but you know, I'm trusting in at least some hope for the characters. But finishing this trilogy really felt like saying goodbye to like old friends. We had been reading this series for quite a while, and it just is so fantastic. I really was kind of skeptical at first. So if you start Ship of Magic and you're like, I don't really know how I feel about this, just trust the process. This is definitely a trust the process kind of series. Because even by the end of the first book, even though it was like I enjoyed it, I was like, I don't know if I'm as invested in the characters as I was the Farseer trilogy, but I think it's because you're so emotionally invested in the characters of the Farseer trilogy, it's hard to like emotionally invest in a new cast of characters. So just give it time. Trust the process, and it's definitely going to be worth it. And I, again, just really love just the emotional depth and just layered story that Hobb creates. She does it like nobody else. And this is probably, I think, one of my favorite fantasy trilogies now, which I can't believe that I'm saying because of how I felt about it from the beginning. And it really just grew on me, and it really endeared me to characters that I didn't think I would ever be endeared to. So to be able to do that really makes me appreciate the writing, and it definitely is one that I would like to go back and read. I definitely see myself going back and reading The Realm of the Elderlings after I finish it. I don't know how long it's going to take us to finish it. I definitely want to draw it out as long as possible, but I think it would be worth reading through a second time, even though it is like 16 books. But just being able to like experience it again and find things that maybe I didn't catch the first time. I know there's going to be a ton of that. So even though we finished it, it was so good. It's definitely one that I think would be worth reading again. And that's rare for me to say because I have a lot of things I want to read, and I rarely say I would want to reread this, but that is how I feel about this series. So the Live Ship Traders, some people debate on like skipping it because it doesn't have like the main characters like Fitz and the Fool from the Farseer trilogy and the other parts of the Realm of the Elderlings, but don't skip it. It has essential magic stuff that is happening that will definitely relate to later parts of this universe, and just the story in itself is incredible, and it is absolutely worth the read. So don't skip it. Don't skip it. So unfortunately, it is that my 5-star read, Ship of Destiny, was immediately followed by my least favorite read this month, the most disappointing read this month, and that is Labyrinth's Heart by M.A. Carrick. This is the third and final book of the Rook and Rose trilogy. I love this trilogy. I love the first 2 books. And, you know, sometimes you gotta take the losses along with the wins. And this definitely was a loss in my opinion. This was a 2.5 for me. And that is rare for me to give that low of a rating because I feel like I'm pretty good at picking out books that I'm going to like. You know, you never know with a book. There is kind of a large consensus that this third book of the Rook and Rose trilogy is a letdown, and I am part of that consensus, unfortunately. I I have a lot of thoughts. I feel like the story was filled with a lot of questionable and distracting narrative choices. There were a lot of like side plots that I feel like kind of muddied the waters, so to speak. The eye on the prize for like keeping the main story in mind is kind of lost when you have so many side plots. And there are multiple side plots within the first two books, but I felt like there was still the overarching story. I felt like that was lost in this third book. It was like, I don't really know what the main purpose of this story is. You know, is it the politics of these different clans that are in this trilogy? Is it dealing with dark magic? Is it dealing with our main character being this con woman and or is it about her and her magical gifts and things like that? It's like I don't know what the main plot is. And that was so odd to me. It just felt like maybe the writers kind of got tunnel vision and got so like zoomed in on like the minor plots and details, trying to like address every little thing and wrap every little thing up, where they kind of lost the big picture. And that's just my opinion. This is all just my opinion. I've seen some other people who I've posted on TikTok and they said that they liked the third book. So, you know, this is just my opinion. But with those choices, it was also like, okay, we had kind of have to like force things to happen. And so there were some magic rules that were broken as well. And I thought that was really poor writing. And I feel like I'm sounding so harsh, but the whole time I was like rooting for this book and wanting it to be as fantastic as the first two. But when things like that happen, it's really hard for me to stay in the story and to root for it and want to read it. It really took me a while to read this because I kept putting it off because I just wasn't enjoying it. And I really hate to say that because I love this world and the characters, but it was really disappointing, unfortunately. I have some shorts TikToks about this book. My first kind of reaction decision was that maybe skip the third book, but I wasn't able to skip it. I wanted to know what happened, even though there is a large consensus that says it is not worth reading. And I almost didn't, but I was like, I have to know. I have to know what happens. If you are that kind of person, just go in it with realistic expectations. Keep these different things in mind. Having like magic rules broken, weird narrative choices where we were getting lost in side plots, and then also like bringing in new elements that I felt were unnecessary, where it almost felt like the writers like felt like they were written into a corner, and I don't think that they were. I feel like there was so much to work off of that they didn't need to do that. But I didn't write the book, so I can't attest to that. And it's a writing duo, so you know, I don't know what happened, but this team of writers, I just feel like really lost it in this third and final book. So maybe that sounds harsh, I don't know, but I can't really ignore those elements that I'm talking about. I feel like those are really important and essential. And when I feel like the overall plot is like muddied and lost and I'm confused about what kind of the end goal is, that really deters me and it takes me out of the story. There was also some character arcs that I didn't like. I said that some arcs ended in disappointing and directionless ways, but at least the main character's arc was satisfying. There were some choices with the main character that I didn't love. I felt like they were kind of distracting, but in relation to what was going on, I could kind of see the purpose of it, but I still wasn't like a huge fan, but by the end I was satisfied with the overall character arc. So there's at least that. There's at least that. But there were some characters that I really loved that I felt like really didn't get the kind of character arc, the ending that I would have hoped for them. So that was disappointing as well. So there are a lot of different factors. So there is a reason why I'm giving it the 2.5. A part of me wanted to give it a 3 just because I love this universe so much, but I have to look at the individual book. And the individual book, separate from the trilogy, which is hard to do, but I'm like, I want to give it a 2 stars. So 2.5 is me being generous and kind of landing in the middle. I only do like a whole number or like a 0.5 for my ratings. I don't do like the 0.25 or 0.75. I don't get into all of that. That is too complicated for me. The heart and purpose of the trilogy felt lost and poorly concluded. I still love the world building and politics and characters, but my enjoyment was buried under frustration of the book falling short. Because there were some good things in here. There were some moments that I really enjoyed, but they were few and far between the moments of frustration and just kind of feeling like it was a slog of a book to get through because I just was not enjoying the choices that were being made. So it's really unfortunate. It's really unfortunate because I really love this trilogy and I really wanted it to be everything that I was hoping. But alas, we are here. So keep that in mind. I think the first 2 books are definitely worth reading. I think you could even read the first book as a standalone, but there are some really incredible things that happen in the second book as well. So if you're one of those people that, I need to know everything that happens, you can read all 3 of them. Just know that the third book may be a disappointment. Everybody's going to have a different opinion about this book. I'm just giving you what I found wrong with it. And that's just my opinion. So reading is subjective. If you liked it, definitely let me know. But I can't say that I loved a book when there are things in it that I have such a problem with, even though I love this whole universe. All right, my last read of the month was a spooky read. And like most of my reads, like I feel like at least fit within kind of the fall theme. Like even with Labyrinth's Heart, it definitely has like spookier elements to it. So it still like fit within the vibe that I was wanting, even if I didn't like it. But my final read was The Twisted Ones by T. Kingfisher. And it's funny, I've said that T. Kingfisher isn't like a favorite author of mine, but I keep coming back to her books. So even if I don't rate them like 5 stars, I still keep coming back to it because I find her books entertaining. And this definitely was an entertaining one for sure. So The Twisted Ones, I rated 3.5 stars. It is definitely spooky and atmospheric. This is a horror, and it's a horror, but it's like really like spooky, creepy, not like terrifying or like gory necessarily. I don't really like that sort of thing. It wasn't like traumatizing, at least for me. But this is very much rooted in like Appalachian folklore. So if that interests you, I would definitely recommend this. I don't know a ton about Appalachian folklore. I've watched a few like YouTube videos like telling like different folklore stories and kind of like origins of that during the spooky season, but my knowledge is very limited. But this is definitely based on different folklore stories and kind of Kingfisher's sort of take on those stories. So this is about a woman who goes to rural North Carolina and helps clean out her deceased grandmother's, unfortunately, hoarder house. She was a hoarder, and so there's just a lot of like junk and everything. It's about her experience with the strange happenings and creatures that she runs into. This is really creepy and unsettling, but I said it's not traumatizing or like over the top in my opinion. I really liked the main character. They were very likable, believable. You want like a main character that you can root for, not somebody that you're like, like it's like if you're watching like a scary movie and it's like you want the main character, the hero, to win. if you don't like the character, you're kind of like, I don't really care if they make it through this or not. That sounds really bad. If you know what I'm talking about, let me know in the comments. But this was a character that you root for, that you wanted to see make it through this experience. But this was really interesting. It has kind of like a little bit of the history of like Appalachian folklore. There are some stories that the like hills of Appalachia up into the mountains, they were connected at one point with the Scottish Highlands, those mountains, when like Pangea was still together, and then when it separated, apparently those mountain ranges were split. So this is kind of like part of the hills of North Carolina, but this is like, I don't know like my geography very well, but it's like, I think kind of a little bit of that mountain range. I'm gonna look it up, one second. So yes, it does touch like some of the southern states. It's even like kind of going into Alabama. But anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent. So it's kind of like the sort of eastern tip of North Carolina. And it's just like really weird circumstances that she experiences. And I don't want to give anything away about it, but it was interesting getting a little bit of like the history of some of the folklore and then actually experiencing the supernatural, freaky stuff that's going on. I really like the main character, and we have a pet dog, and I really liked like the bond that they have. It really made this kind of like warm, like heartwarming, grounding sort of element to the story amidst all of the weirdness that's going on. And the supernatural elements definitely create tension and suspense, but without like full-on nightmares. For me, it's just like, okay, this is like made up spookum sort of things. It's not something that I personally would take seriously. So that's just my like tolerance as far as spooky things go. So just keep that in mind. If this stuff would like totally freak you out and give you nightmares, I wouldn't recommend it. So just know your own tolerance for scary things. But this definitely was like an authentic, like the things in the wood, the others that are in the woods sort of vibe of Appalachian folklore. And like I said, I'm not well versed in it, but I still really enjoyed these stories. And it felt very like authentic to kind of the oratory stories that you hear about Appalachian folklore. I really enjoyed the audiobook of this. It definitely enhanced like the eeriness and made it a really immersive experience, as audiobooks tend to do. But definitely with this one, it being like spooky and kind of getting the inflections and everything, it just kind of added to it. Overall, I think this would be really great for like a cozy night in when you want a good like scare and creep out. Something that hopefully won't keep you up at night. But again, I rated this 3.5 stars and would definitely recommend for a spooky book with Appalachian folklore, but something that I don't think will traumatize you. All right, guys, I went a long time, but I hope that you enjoyed this. I tried to be a little bit more detailed about my feelings about the books. Sometimes I feel like I breeze through stuff. So maybe this is going to be a little bit longer. We'll see when it comes to editing, but I hope that you enjoyed this video, and hopefully maybe you got some recommendations from this, or if you read these, let me know what your perspectives were on the books, especially with Labyrinth's Heart. I definitely want to see what other people thought about it, and definitely let me know your favorite read of October. Definitely give me recommendations if they are along the lines of any of the books that I read. But I will definitely be, like I said, planning a live stream in the month of November, and we'll get up to other things, other content as well, so look out for that. But if you got to the end of this video, leave me some kind of fall leave. We're kind of getting to the end of fall already, which is crazy. I can't believe that October's already over, but let me know you got to the end of the video and you enjoyed it with some kind of fall emoji, a fall leaf or something like that. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to go vote on the poll for the live stream in my community tab, and I will see you guys later. Bye.